house on Briar Hollow Road. Briar Hollow Road curved away from the highway, like something trying to escape notice. 6 houses lined the narrow stretch of cracked asphalt, each set back behind thin yards and older trees that leaned too close together. At the very end stood the Cresswell house, white paint peeling, porch swing unmoving, windows like blank, patient eyes. It had been empty for 9 years, long enough for children to grow into teenagers who only half remembered why their parents lowered their voices when they rode bikes past it, long enough for weeds to claim the garden and for the mailbox to rust shut, long enough for the story to become less a memory and more a warning. Then, one Thursday morning in late October, the lights came back on. Mrs. Henley noticed first. She always did. She had been awake before sunrise for 3 decades, watching the street from behind lace curtains, with a mug of black coffee warming her hands. At 6:12 a.m., she saw a soft amber glow behind the curtains of the Cresswell house. She blinked once, twice. The light stayed on. Her coffee cup rattled against the saucer. By noon, everyone in Alders Ridge knew someone had moved into the house where Daniel Cresswell had disappeared. Daniel Cresswell had not been the kind of man people expected to vanish. He worked at the feed store, coached Little League in the spring, and waved at passing cars whether he knew the driver or not. On the night he went missing, he and his wife Mara had eaten meatloaf for dinner. That much had been confirmed. The plates were still in the sink when deputies arrived. Mara had called at 10:43 p.m., her voice steady as she told dispatch her husband had gone for a walk after dinner and hadn't returned. Search parties combed the woods for weeks. They dragged the quarry lake. They checked abandoned barns and drainage tunnels. Nothing surfaced. No body, no blood, no sign of struggle. Just a man erased from the map. 3 months later, Mara packed a single suitcase and left town without ceremony. She sold the house through an out-of-state attorney and disappeared as completely as her husband. Sheriff Avery had been a deputy back then, young, ambitious. Certain every mystery had a loose thread if you pulled hard enough. He had walked the woods until his boots split. He had interviewed Mara twice. What he remembered most was her composure. Not once did she cry in front of him. Not once did her voice shake. When he asked if she believed Daniel might have run off, she had smiled faintly and said, "Daniel wouldn't leave without saying goodbye." It hadn't felt like hope. It had felt like fact. 9 years passed. The file gathered dust, but never closed in Avery's mind. When word reached him that someone had purchased the Cresswell property, something tightened in his chest. The new owner introduced himself 3 days after the lights appeared. Thomas Hale, mid-40s, lean build, neatly trimmed hair graying at the temples. He went door to door with a peach pie and an easy smile. "Figured I should introduce myself," he told Mrs. Henley. His voice was soft but precise, like each word had been practiced before leaving his mouth. When she later tried to describe him, she struggled. "He was polite," she said. "Normal. I just can't remember his eyes." Sheriff Avery drove out that Saturday. The house looked freshly tended, curtains replaced, porch swept, wind chimes untangled. Hale opened the door before Avery knocked. "Sheriff," he said pleasantly, as if he had been expecting him. "Just checking in," Avery replied. "House has history." "Yes," Hale said. "I read about that." He stepped aside but did not invite Avery in. Terrible thing, a disappearance. You aware it's still open? Avery asked. Unresolved. Hale's expression did not change. Some things resolve themselves in time. Avery let his gaze drift past Hale's shoulder. The interior looked orderly, sparse furniture, fresh paint, no photographs. You planning on staying long? Avery asked. I like quiet places, Hale said. They let you hear what matters. That night at 3:17 a.m., Mrs. Henley woke to a sound she could not place at first. A metallic bite, a pause, another bite. She lay still, heart fluttering, and realized it sounded like a shovel striking dirt. The noise came faintly from the direction of the Cresswell house. The next morning she told her neighbor, who admitted she'd heard something similar. By afternoon, 3 separate households claimed they had been disturbed by rhythmic digging in the night. Sheriff Avery dismissed it publicly. Animals, old houses shifting. But privately, he drove past Briar Hollow after midnight. He parked with his lights off and listened. For a long time, there was nothing but wind brushing branches together. Then, just as he considered leaving, he heard it. A dull thud, metal entering soil. Slow, methodical. Avery stepped out of the cruiser. The sound stopped instantly. The yard lay still beneath the moonlight. No movement, no silhouette. Only the faint scent of turned earth lingering in the air. The next day, Avery requested the original Cresswell file from storage. He spread photographs across his desk, kitchen sink, back door, yard. Something tugged at him as he studied an old image of the side garden. The flower bed had once been rectangular, neat, bordered by stones. In a new photo taken during Hale's property purchase, the stones were gone. The soil looked darker in one section, as though it had been disturbed long ago and settled differently. Avery drove back out without calling ahead. Hale was in the yard, kneeling beside the garden, hands in the dirt. Planting something? Avery asked. Hale looked up calmly. Restoring, he corrected. The previous owners let it decay. Avery scanned the soil. It appeared freshly turned, though the edges of the patch suggested older disruption beneath. Mind if I take a look around? Avery asked. Hale stood slowly. Do you have a warrant? The question hung between them. Avery did not. He studied Hale's face for flickers of fear or irritation. There were none, only patience. Just routine, Avery said. Hale smiled faintly. Of course. Inside, the house felt too clean, too intentional, as if it were staged for someone else's inspection. Avery moved room to room, noting the lack of personal items. No mail stacked on counters, no framed photos. The basement door stood at the end of the hall. Avery rested his hand on the knob. May I? Hale gestured politely. The basement smelled faintly of damp concrete. A single bulb illuminated the space. The floor was bare except for a workbench and a metal shovel leaning against the wall. The blade was clean. Too clean. Avery crouched, running his fingers along the concrete floor. Near the far wall, he noticed a faint hairline crack, forming a rough square shape, as if a section had once been cut and resealed. You do any work down here? Avery asked. Just cleaning, Hale replied from the stairs. This house deserves care. Avery stood. The crack nagged at him. Mind if we bring in a forensic team? Just to close the old file. Hale's eyes held steady. If you believe that's necessary. The warrant came 2 days later. By then, half the town had heard whispers of excavation. Forensic technicians pried up the square of concrete in the basement. recently disturbed. The technicians began to dig. The first strike revealed nothing. The second uncovered fabric. The third exposed bone. Mrs. Henley watched from her porch as 2 officers carried a black bag up from the basement steps. She pressed her hand to her mouth, though she had known, somewhere deep down she had known, since the lights came back on. Sheriff Avery stood over the excavation site long after the others left. The remains were partial, but enough for identification. Dental records would confirm it officially, but Avery already felt certain. Daniel Cresswell had never left his house. He had been beneath it all along. Hale did not resist arrest. As Avery placed the cuffs around his wrists, he asked the question that had gnawed at him. Why buy the house? Hale tilted his head slightly. I didn't, he said softly. Not really. Avery frowned. Then why? Hale's faint smile returned. Because no one looks for what's already been found. The statement made no sense until 3 days later when the lab results returned. The remains in the basement were not Daniel Cresswell. Dental records did not match. The bones were older. At least 20 years. The Cresswell file reopened fully. Avery dug deeper into property records and uncovered something buried in paperwork. Before the Cresswells, the house had belonged to a man named Arthur Hale, Thomas Hale's father. Arthur Hale had reported his own brother missing in 1996. The case had gone cold within months. No body, no charges. Arthur sold the house 5 years later. The timeline settled into place like teeth in a trap. Thomas had grown up in that house. He had known its foundation, its weaknesses, its secrets. Avery visited Thomas in his holding cell. The body wasn't Cresswell, Avery said. Thomas nodded once. No, it was your uncle. Another nod. Yes. Avery leaned closer. Where is Daniel Cresswell? For the first time, something shifted in Thomas's expression. Not fear, not regret. Something closer to amusement. Sheriff, he said quietly, you're still digging in the wrong place. Avery felt the ground tilt beneath him. That night, he returned alone to Briar Hollow Road. He walked the yard slowly, flashlight cutting through darkness. The garden patch lay exposed from the earlier dig, soil scattered. But something beyond it caught his eye. The old well near the tree line. It had been sealed decades ago, filled and capped with heavy stones. Avery approached, brushing leaves aside. One of the stones sat slightly askew, as though moved recently. His pulse quickened. Backup arrived 20 minutes later. They shifted the stones and peered into the darkness below. The smell rose first, then the truth. Daniel Cresswell had been placed in the well 9 years ago, weighted down, hidden in plain sight. The basement grave had been older, unrelated, a relic of a different crime. Thomas Hale had returned not to conceal his uncle's body, but to retrieve it. He had planned to move the remains before anyone thought to look beneath the foundation. But the digging had drawn attention too soon. In the end, it wasn't brilliance that exposed him. It was noise, a shovel striking dirt in the quiet hours of morning. Briar Hollow Road returned to silence after the arrest. The house emptied once more, windows dark, porch swings still. 6 houses lined the curve of asphalt again, and at the end stood a reminder that some places do not forget what they are built upon. Sheriff Avery closed both case files within the month. Yet some nights, when the wind shifts just right, he wakes at 3:17 a.m., certain hears it again. Metal biting into earth, slow, patient, waiting. Briar Hollow Road should have felt lighter after the arrests. 2 bodies recovered, 2 families given answers, headlines printed, statements made. But relief never quite settled over Alders Ridge. It hovered instead, thin and uncertain, like mist that never fully burns away. The Cresswell house stood empty again. Evidence tape snapped in the wind for a week before someone finally removed it. Sheriff Avery told himself the unease was just residue, the kind that clings after a long investigation. But 3 nights after the well was opened, he woke again at 3:17 a.m. The sound was unmistakable this time. Not digging, not metal. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps crunching across gravel. He sat upright, listening hard. His house sat miles from Briar Hollow. There was no gravel near his property. The sound continued for 5 measured steps, then stopped directly beneath his bedroom window. Avery reached for the lamp and switched it on. Silence. He rose, crossed the room, and pulled back the curtain. The yard lay empty under the porch light. No footprints, no movement. Only his own reflection staring back at him in the glass. By morning, he almost convinced himself it had been a dream, until Mrs. Henley called. "Sheriff," she whispered, her voice thinner than usual. He was back. Avery didn't ask who. "Thomas, I saw him," she said, "standing by the well, just standing there. I blinked and he was gone. Mrs. Henley, Hale is in county lockup." "Then someone who looks just like him," she insisted. "Same posture, same stillness." Avery drove out immediately. The well remained sealed with fresh boards and police markings. The yard was undisturbed. Mrs. Henley swore she had seen a figure at 3:17 a.m. exactly. Avery noted the time carefully. That number again. At the station, he pulled Thomas Hale's visitation log. No visitors. No unusual behavior reported by guards. Hale had spoken little since his arrest. Ate normally. Slept through the night according to checks. Avery requested the overnight surveillance footage from the holding corridor. He watched the timestamp roll to 3:16 a.m. Thomas lay on his bunk, eyes closed. At 3:17, the overhead lights flickered once. Just a stutter. A glitch in old wiring, perhaps. But in that half-second distortion, the camera image blurred. When clarity returned, Thomas was sitting upright on his bunk. Not groggy, not confused. Just sitting, eyes open, staring directly at the camera. Avery felt a chill travel up his spine. The guard's report mentioned no disturbances, no flickering lights, no inmate movement. On the footage, Thomas remained sitting for exactly 1 minute. At 3:18, he lay back down and closed his eyes. Avery rewound the clip, watched it again. The flicker felt wrong, too precise. That afternoon, he visited Thomas in the interrogation room. "Sleep well?" Avery asked casually. Thomas tilted his head. "As well as one can in a cage. You sit up around 3:17 most nights." A faint smile. "Time is interesting, Sheriff. It repeats itself in certain places." "What does that mean?" Thomas leaned forward slightly. "You ever wonder why your witness woke at that exact minute when she heard digging?" Avery's jaw tightened. "You were digging?" "Yes," Thomas admitted calmly. "But not every night she heard it." Silence stretched. "What are you implying?" Avery asked. Thomas's eyes sharpened. "Houses remember. Foundations hold impressions. Violence leaves echoes." Avery stood abruptly. "You're trying to unsettle me." "No," Thomas said softly. "I'm warning you." Avery left without another word. That evening he pulled files on the property. Before Arthur Hale, before the Cresswells, the land records stretched back nearly a century. In 1928, a farmhouse had stood on the same foundation footprint. It burned down in winter. Official cause, faulty stove. Casualties, one occupant unaccounted for. Body never recovered. Avery leaned back slowly in his chair. A missing man in 1928, another in 1996, Daniel Cresswell in 2017. 3 disappearances tied to the same soil. At 3:17 a.m., Avery sat awake intentionally, waiting. The clock ticked louder than usual. At exactly 3:17, his phone vibrated. A call from dispatch. "Sheriff," the night operator said, breathless. "We've got a situation at Briar Hollow." Avery was already moving. Blue lights washed across tree trunks as he approached the Cresswell house. The front door stood open. Mrs. Henley and 2 neighbors clustered near the road, pale and shaking. "It's inside," one of them muttered. Avery drew his weapon and stepped through the doorway. The air felt colder than outside. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. He moved room to room until he reached the basement door. It stood ajar. A faint scraping sound drifted upward, metal against concrete. Avery descended slowly. The single bulb swung gently overhead, though no wind stirred. On the basement floor, near the square they had excavated days earlier, lay a shovel. Moving, not by much, just a subtle tremor, as if something beneath the soil shifted. Avery stepped closer. The tremor stopped. Silence swallowed the room. He crouched and pressed his palm against the exposed dirt. It felt warm, warmer than it should. The sensation vanished instantly. "Sheriff," a deputy called from upstairs. Avery stood unsettled. "Probably settling," he muttered, though he didn't believe it. The next morning, the county announced plans to demolish the house. Too much history, too much liability. Avery didn't argue. Demolition began 3 days later. Excavators tore into wood and plaster. Walls collapsed inward. The porch swings splintered beneath heavy machinery. Neighbors watched from a safe distance. At 3:17 p.m., as the foundation was cracked open, a worker shouted. Machinery halted. Avery approached the exposed earth cautiously. Beneath layers of soil, beyond the square where Arthur's brother had been buried, lay something older. Bones, several sets, tangled together. No coffins, no markers, just remains layered like sediment. Avery felt the weight of decades pressing upward from the ground. Forensics later confirmed at least 5 individuals. Different eras, different causes of death. None officially reported missing from that address. It wasn't a single crime scene. It was a pattern, a magnet. Something about that land drew violence to it, or concealed it too well. That night, Avery returned to the jail. He placed photographs of the newly discovered remains on the table in front of Thomas Hale. For the first time, Thomas's composure faltered. Not fear, recognition. "You didn't know," Avery realized aloud. Thomas studied the photos carefully. "No," he said quietly. "I only knew about my uncle." "Then why return?" Avery pressed. Thomas hesitated. His voice dropped. "Because when I was a boy, I heard digging every night at 3:17. My father told me it was pipes or animals, but the sound came from below, from under my bed." Avery's pulse slowed. And sometimes," Thomas continued, "I would wake up already standing." Silence filled the room. "Standing where?" Avery asked. Thomas met his gaze steadily. "In the yard." The air felt thinner. "Are you saying you killed Cresswell?" Thomas's expression hardened. "No, I'm his hand on the table. That's enough. But doubt crept into him like cold water through cracked stone. Over the next week, demolition continued until nothing remained but a scar of churned earth. The county decided not to rebuild. The lot would remain empty, a small fenced patch of land at the end of a quiet road. Mrs. Henley said she finally slept through the night after the foundation was removed. No more sounds, no more shadows near the well. Avery almost believed it was over, until the night he woke again at 3:17. No footsteps this time, no digging, just silence so heavy it pressed against his ears. He sat upright slowly. Something felt different, wrong. He turned toward the bedroom door. It was open. He always closed it before bed. Avery rose cautiously. The hallway stretched empty. The house still. He stepped toward the front window and looked out at his yard. At the far edge, near the tree line, a patch of earth looked darker than the rest. Freshly disturbed. His breath caught. He didn't own a shovel. He hadn't dug anything. Yet the soil near the trees appeared turned. Slow, rhythmic, as if something beneath had shifted upward. Avery stood frozen as a faint indentation formed in the dirt. Not from above, from below. The soil rose slightly, then settled. Rose again, like something pressing gently upward. Testing. He felt it then, the same warmth he'd felt in the Cresswell basement. Traveling through the ground, through foundations, through time. At exactly 3:18 a.m., the movement stopped. The yard returned to stillness. Avery did not sleep again that night. By morning, the soil looked ordinary, undisturbed, as if nothing had happened. He drove to Briar Hollow Road before sunrise. The empty lot lay quiet beneath frost. No house, no well, just open ground. For the first time in years, there was nothing built atop it. Avery stepped through the gate and stood at the center of the scarred earth. The wind moved softly through trees. At 3:17 p.m., standing there in daylight, he felt a vibration beneath his boots. Faint, almost imagined. A slow, patient pulse, waiting for something to be built again. Waiting for walls. Waiting for weight. Avery understood then that some places are not haunted by spirits. They are hungry for structure, for secrecy, for the shelter a house provides. Remove the walls, and the ground grows restless. That evening, he filed a recommendation with the county, permanent memorial park designation. No future construction permitted. The request was approved within the month. Grass was planted, a small plaque installed. Children eventually played there in daylight, but no one stayed past dusk. Years later, Sheriff Avery would retire and leave Alders Ridge. Briar Hollow Road would fade from headlines. The empty lot would look harmless beneath sun and snow. Yet sometimes, on quiet nights in distant towns, Avery still wakes at 3:17 a.m. He sits very still in the dark, listening, not for digging, not for footsteps, but for the subtle sound of soil shifting somewhere far away, as if searching